Assalamu alaikum everybody. Welcome everyone on the interactive group and here. Apologize for the late start. It seems like every day literally just flies by. It's hard to keep up, so I'm sorry to keep you waiting. So I will keep it short. Thank you again for joining us on a Tuesday night, which I know is always challenging. But it's just so valuable. I mean, especially I was really especially touched by the last Surah Sa'd. So if you have not had a chance to see it, absolutely do. It was, I mean, everyone is earth-shattering, and I think everyone touches everyone. Every surah touches probably, each person in a very different way. But I found that, that one for me in particular was very, very earth-shattering. It's really fascinating. In the last halaqah, I started out by mentioning that, people have been finding their way online to make disparaging comments about us and what we're doing. Last time I commented that someone said, why is there a woman without a hijab, the face of this movement? And I was talking to the sheikh about this, and it's like, when you think about it, first of all, he was like, we're not a movement, we're not a cult, we're an education, and educations are supposed to push you out of your comfort zone and force you to think and teach you a different way to think and introduce you to things that you've never heard before. I mean, that is the point of an education. And, certainly no one is forcing anyone to be here. So if you don't like what you're seeing, then don't watch us on YouTube and don't watch us on Facebook and, don't take the effort to write something negative. There's no point. And especially if you're, if you identify as Muslims, because sometimes these are Muslim names that are particularly disparaging. And, we obviously as Muslims are supposed to honor, knowledge and seeking knowledge as the height of, our efforts and our purpose. And so it's always sort of funny to me. But I think it's a sign of good things. I mean, people are getting their cages rattled, and that's a good thing. That's part of education. And this is an incredible group here. I'm really proud of everyone who has chosen to take a year out of their life, and the people who follow us regularly on these interactive sessions. This is quite an impressive group of people, and if anyone is, if you're subscribed to our weekly emails, every Friday morning you'll get a an email message from me, and I've been introducing some of the people that are here. We have PhDs, JDs, medical doctors, people who are still, in school, haven't finished school yet. We have all kinds. And, these are great minds and people who are, not afraid of this challenge. So I say this to also encourage people, if you are not signed up or subscribed to our weekly email, please do. Just go to our website. It's easy to subscribe. And then you can get your regular check-in on, you get a link to the things we're doing here, you get a summary of the khutbah from the previous week, and then you get my musings, as well as a really sweet piece from our niece, Delia, who I asked to kind of sift through the content that we have and share anything that touches her, because she comes from a younger generation obviously than me, and I think it's really important to share things that touch people at different generations, and so she will find things that strike her, and those are things that she likes to share. So that's very valuable. And just to give you a little bit of window into how what we're doing here beyond just these YouTube sessions is you'll notice that if you get the weekly email, you'll see you get a very detailed summary of the khutbah, which I think is extremely valuable. But also, as we have been doing these sessions here, we have been transcribing and moving forward with editing. I did get some emails that said, hey, wouldn't it be great if you guys publish these things? Great minds think alike, because we're already on top of it. With every single session we transcribe, we are working on editing, trying to keep up, because obviously with 2 surahs a week, it's an extremely hectic pace. And the long-term vision is to have a published, multi-volume set of this entire tafsir. And what's particularly special about it is obviously it's in the English language, and not since Muhammad Asad back in 1980 has there been an English tafsir. And this is what I know from the smart brains around here that have been telling me. There is the study Quran, obviously, that we use here, but that is much more of a survey. It's not necessarily original thought, and what we're presenting here is, as the professor said, his personal journey. And so what you're hearing here is a combination of things from the tradition, but also things that he has arrived at in his own, journey in his lifetime, in building a relationship with the Quran. And, me personally, like when I hear what we cover in these sessions, I hear the truth. I feel it in my, I feel it register in my heart, in my soul. And I compare that to how I feel when I've been in Muslim spaces and I've, heard other quote unquote tafsir, which to me, like immediately, it shuts off my brain. It feels stupid, irrational. It's just, there's no comparison. And so our hope and our goal is to preserve this beautiful knowledge, for lifetimes to come, long after we're gone, hopefully in a book, because as the professor has said here, we don't, the digital stuff can be gone in an instant, in a blink of an eye, in one sun flare, everything's gone. We still believe in books. So that's what we're working towards. And interestingly, I was speaking today with the transcription company, and ever since we started this very intense process, we've come to the realization that we spend about $1,500 a week at least on transcription. That's just the raw transcription. So from that, we take that raw transcription and we spend a lot more hours in cleaning it up, editing it, turning it from sort of a spoken word to more of a written text. And then obviously we would like to add commentary and citations and things like that. So by the time we finish publishing this work, it'll be a really, important academic volume. So that's a lot of money, and, it adds up very quickly. And so I wanted to share that because, this is, something that is so valuable and so important to me. It's priceless. $1,500 is, definitely a lot of money, but for what we're doing, it's obviously worth it. But I say that to encourage people who believe in this project to please, tell others, give what you can, donate, help us get this project, finished. And this is something that will obviously benefit, hopefully our children and our grandchildren and generations to come long after. I really believe that what we're hearing here is, a flavor for what the early Muslims understood, like the things that really, as we say, turned desert dwellers into civilization builders. I mean, it's like it turned people into passionate Muslims that were willing to sacrifice everything. And what we have today came from that sacrifice. And hopefully what we can seed for the future will come from whatever sacrifice we make now. So I want to encourage people to, invest in this project with whatever you can do. So anyway, thank you so much again. And looking forward to another session, and may Allah bless it and bless all of you and bless all of our collective journey to knowledge and enlightenment. And that's it.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Subhanallah al-Aliyyil Azim. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa ihsani ila yawm al-din. واشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي يا رب العالمين. Inshallah, tonight we'll do Surah Al Takwir, and I will, as usual, make some comments about the time of revelation of Surah Al Takwir. I will make some just introductory comments, and then we'll break for Maghrib. And I'm of course mindful that it's a Tuesday night, so I'll try not to go long. But what I want to say at the introduction is that now the pace of surah is coming very fast. It's 2 surahs a week. Which obviously is much faster than the time it took to reveal the Quran, the revelation of the Quran itself. And I would just want to underscore for everyone, those present, either present physically or present on the net, or those who will listen to this either now or in years to come or whatnot. Receiving the Quran is a heavy responsibility. Nothing is more detestable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than someone who carries the Quran but does not embody it. Those who recite the Quran but do not reflect its ethics, its morality, its lessons, or those who study the Quran but it passes through them like a spear passes through the air. Be mindful that with knowledge comes accountability. In many ways, I had always hesitated about teaching my journey with the Quran and the years of research, because part of me felt sorry, or part of me did not want to put that type of responsibility on people. I know that once people receive notice in the form of knowledge, their accountability rises in proportion to the knowledge received. And teaching, not just receiving, but teaching is another level of responsibility. It's so serious. It's so serious. And I know that Muslims these days don't take it seriously at all. But if you understood the accountability of a teacher, you would think a million times before you teach a single word. Teaching is another level of responsibility. My advice to you, if you teach something, you have to embody it. You have to fully represent it. My advice to you, do not teach something unless you master it. This is just the simple ethics of knowledge and pedagogy. You don't teach unless you master. The Muslim practice of learning a little bit of knowledge and teaching a little bit of knowledge has been disastrous. It's disastrous on this earth because the consequences are disastrous on this earth, but it's also disastrous for the teacher in the hereafter. So please, I warn everyone, if your ego tells you, well, I received this knowledge, I'm going to teach it now, think very carefully about whether you embody this material, whether you rise to the level that you can teach it, and whether you've mastered it enough to be able to do that. Your conscience is your only supervision, because that's the way it is. And your accountability before Allah in the final day. But even if you're not going to teach it, as these surahs come, and I've always resisted for many, many years, for over 20 years I've resisted teaching, until, as I said before, I just became convinced that this knowledge has to be preserved somehow. Because when you are receiving 2 surahs a week, and you could become addicted to the process of receiving the knowledge, but you do not embody it. And that's a very heavy responsibility. Take each surah as a personal revelation. I've said this before, a personal revelation. Allah is talking to you. Allah is communicating a lesson to you. Allah is telling you something, and when Allah speaks, you better listen very, very carefully. Do not be among those who Allah speaks to and then they go on with their life unchanged. The Quran warned us repeatedly about those people. And their fate is not pleasant in the hereafter. If Allah speaks to you, each divine speech should result in a transformation. So, because I worry for my students, I worry for people who, well, I don't worry about the jealousies, I don't worry about the silly politics, I don't worry about the slander and the attacks. I mean, I've lived with that all my life, you know. May Allah forgive everyone. But I worry about the responsibility of knowledge and the accountability of people. As we will see, inshallah, Surah Kuwirat is another surah that delivers an earth-shattering moral lesson for those who listen carefully and those who study carefully and reflect carefully. On its surface, it's telling you something that you might think you're familiar with. But with a little bit of study, of reflection, you'll realize that it's actually telling you something that is entirely transformative for your life. So with that, let's break and pray Maghrib and then come back, inshallah, in 5 minutes. Surah Al Takwir. So Surah Al Takwir is among the very early revelations in Mecca. Most scholars say it's number 7 in order of revelation. So it comes after Al-Alaq, Al-Qalam, Al-Muddathir, Al-Muzammil, and it comes after Al-Fatiha, and it also comes after Surah Al-Masad, probably right after Surah Al-Masad. There aren't much in terms of asbab al-nuzul or circumstances for revelation. I'll mention a few reports that were, but I'll comment on them in due time. And what's fascinating about Surah Al Takwir is that there is, as usual, there is, a debate about what certain things mean. But more importantly, I think, is that there are two different ways to understand Surah Al Takwir. And I'm actually, inshallah, going to go through the first way, which is the more, you could call it more literal way. But as I explain, whether it's literal or not, we'll see. But it's perhaps we could say more traditional, although that's not also and so there's one level of understanding it. But subhanAllah, there's a very different way of understanding Surah Al Takwir, not inconsistent, but at a entirely different mode of interpretation and a different methodology of interpretation, which was very common and very popular, was particularly Sufi orientations in Islam. Now, I'm going to tell you a third way of understanding Surah Al Takwir, which is my interpretation of Surah Al Takwir, and Allahu Alam, Allah knows best. So there will be the first, the second, and the third. And inshallah I will go through them in order. Maybe just to state an obvious point, the reason that we can have these different ways of interpreting Surah Al-Takwir is because of the language itself, is because of the choice of the language by the author in choosing words that easily lend themselves to different levels of interpretation. So I'm going to do an unusual thing tonight, inshallah, and that is to actually go, usually I mix so as I comment on each ayah, I say, well, there are this way to understand it, there's this way to understand it, so on. But this time I'm actually going to go through the entire surah, the first way, the entire surah the second way, and the entire surah the third way, which is mine. Okay, so إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, translated, when the sun is enfolded. وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ, and when the stars fade away. وَإِذَا الْجِبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ, when the mountains are set in motion. This is the translation of the study Quran. وَإِذَا الْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ, and when pregnant camels are abandoned. وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ, and when beasts are gathered. وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ, and when seas are made to swell. And وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, when souls are coupled. So we start with وَإِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, when translated by the study Quran as when the sun is unfolded. Kuwirat, literally, kawara shay is to literally roll up something. And especially we talk about kawrat al-imama, the way that you tie imama, a turban. That's where that term is often used in Old Arabic. But here, most commentators said that it is not talking about the sun itself being wrapped up or unfolded. So it's not necessarily the case that the sun will die or that the sun will go anywhere. But that, and interestingly, most said that it is the light of the sun is going to be constrained as if folded up so that the light of the sun does not reach earth. So a very vivid picture of the coming of the final day or the final time, where we have the light of the sun, which is very necessary for human life, literally being wrapped up as if you are closing a book. For just for completeness sake, some said that التكوير يغطي لون الشيء عن الأبصار, so that something will take place where people will no longer be able to see the sun in the sky, although it's there, that it's not going to be visible to them. There is in the tradition, if you go to a very traditional school of tafsir, they will tell you about hadiths or reports from attributed to companions of the Prophet ﷺ that talk about the sun being shrunk and thrown on earth. Other reports talk about the sun being thrown in hellfire so that it joins with hellfire. None of these reports are reliable, and I'm not going to spend any time on them because although they exist, nearly all of them, all of these reports come from the Qussas, the storytellers, the class of people who in the medieval times would travel around entertaining people with mythology around the Quran. And all the reports that come from the Qussas, because they were storytellers and they were entertainers, in my methodology, we reject them offhand. So when we find someone that we know is among the Qussas in the chains of transmission, we reject these stories as inventions. Okay, so that's the first image. وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ, translated as stars fade away. The only thing to say in the first methodology of understanding this, there is in the tradition again some discussion as to whether the stars themselves are going to be moved from their place. So in other words, are there going to be the death of stars? Or is it rather that whatever happens to the stars, and perhaps nothing, but is that when we say inqadarat means that we will not be able to see the stars. So neither sunlight will be reaching Earth, nor light from stars, bodies in the heavens will be reaching Earth. And as we will find out in a second, it's because the very nature of the sky, the nature of the biosphere that surrounds the Earth will have changed. So it is really not a surprise. I don't put much credence in the reports that talk about that the stars will be falling down or that the stars will be destroyed, and largely again for authenticity and reliability reasons, and there is no reason to believe that the death of the earth or that the hereafter and the resurrection and this whole process will necessarily mean anything will happen to the stars. It's up to Allah. So, you do read, if you open up Tafsir Al Tabari or Tafsir Ibn Kathir, you read things like, the stars will start falling down, or that some even say the stars will fall down on earth. None of that is reliable and worth the investment in time. But what is clear is that the stars will no longer be visible. وَإِذَا الْجِبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ, and the mountains, not necessarily, although the study Quran says the mountains will be set in motion, it is not necessarily set in motion, but that the mountains will be crumbling and shaking. So an image of rather terrifying earthquakes. that will force mountains to become as molten lava or to start crumbling and shaking. And with this introduction, it tells us, وَالْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ وَالْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ before الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ وَالْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ. Al-Ishar were camels in Old Arabic. They were camels that are pregnant in their 10th month. And they were considered by Arabs to be extremely valuable. Pregnant camels in their 10th months were the highest priced camels. And so at one level, the Quran is saying that that day will be so terrifying that even the most valuable property will go unattended and uncared for. وَالْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ means that these extremely valuable pieces of property will go unattended. But عِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ also in Old Arabic could mean clouds, clouds pregnant with rain. And so عِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ could be that the clouds will not be raining, that rainfall will be cut off. وَعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ could also mean and very valuable, highly what's the word? Land that you can farm.
Fertile. Fertile.
A fertile, highly fertile land will go abandoned. So it could mean any of these three things: that rain will be cut off, and a camel, very valuable property like pregnant camels, will be abandoned, or even very fertile land will be ignored. But the idea is people are not going to be in the mood of paying attention to their property or their wealth. وَالْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ, and when wild beasts are gathered, the only thing, the thing worth noting here is that there is a discussion in the tradition as to what happens with animals. And there are several theological perspectives, and I'm summarizing, a great deal of debate, and but there is a hadith attributed to the Prophet ﷺ that says that in the final day justice will be achieved, even justice among animals, so that if one animal injures another, justice will be achieved between these animals. There is a great deal in the tradition that animals will be resurrected to testify against anyone that hurt them. But there is disagreement in the tradition as to what happens after animals testify. One point of view says that after they testify against those who hurt them, the animals will perish, will disappear. They perform their function. Second point of view says after they testify, we don't know what happens to the animals because Allah doesn't tell us, and we shouldn't speculate. Third point of view is that after the animals testify that they continue to exist but in Jannah. That they are given forms in Jannah and they continue their existence in Jannah, and especially relationships between human beings and other animals continue in Jannah. So if you were close to a horse, you were close to a camel, you were close to a dog, you were close to a cat, that continues on in Jannah. And that the absolute justice mandates that. There's even a hadith, but it's not reliable, that says that absolute justice will be exacted to the extent that even flies will have their measure of justice. So from the biggest to the smallest animal. The fly hadith, justice to the flies hadith, is not very reliable. The hadith that if an animal injures another, justice will be achieved between them is reliable, but it's ahad. It's of singular transmission. So the beasts gathered is touches upon this much larger theological debate, but for Surah Al Takwir, some said that basically it's saying that even animals will be in a state of daze that day, because it will be completely overwhelming. Okay. وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ. Sujirat is a very fascinating word, because it could mean that the seas overflow to the point that salt sea and fresh sea mix. So there will be massive flooding everywhere. But sujirat could have exactly the opposite meaning. It's one of those words in Arabic that could have one meaning and its opposite, depending on the context. It could mean that the seas dry up, and so no rain is coming down and the seas dry up. But it could also mean, sujirat could also mean be set on fire. That you will find, we can speculate, maybe volcanoes, maybe molten lava, but the seas will be bubbling with heat. And after this intro, in the first 6 ayahs, one right after the other, in this construction of imagery that is breathtaking and terrifying, وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ. So, and when souls are coupled, the issue here, of course, is what does that reference? Coupled with what? And the points of view here are well settled. Most said that what it means is that souls are coupled with their bodies. Some said that no, it's not souls coupled with their bodies, but rather souls are coupled with their deeds. So you and your deeds come together. Yet others said coupled, because relying on other parts of the Quran means that those who did good will find themselves coming in union with fellow good wayfarers. In other words, those that you were close to, who were also on the right path, will come together. But those who were evil, not only will be coupled with their evil mates in life, but will also be coupled with their demons, the demons that have accompanied them in their existence on earth. Some you find this in Ibn Kathir. You'll also find it in Tabari and so on. They say Zuwijat means that if you did good, you will be coupled with your soulmate in heaven, your husband or your wife in heaven, and if you did bad, that you will be coupled with a demon instead of a soulmate. That, in my opinion, is the least likely meaning, but you'll find it, even in many translations, you'll find it. Okay. Now, after that act of coupling, probably coupled, in my opinion, with your deeds and confronting your deeds, comes the moment وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. And the female child who is buried alive will be asked by what fault she was killed. Now, al-wa'd is to be covered over by a heavy burden. So, for instance, we'll say, لا يؤوده حفظهما. Allah is not tired by carrying a heavy burden. The reason that these girls were called maw'uda is because they would be covered over by dirt. And what it refers to, as you probably know, is that in pre-Islamic Arabia, some tribes, not necessarily Mecca, it wasn't a common practice in Mecca itself, but it was a practice in some tribes, the less prestigious and less powerful tribes around Mecca, they considered girls to be a burden because girls in warfare or in raids could be captured and enslaved. And that they consider to be a disgrace upon the tribe, because if the tribe is not strong enough to free its enslaved girls, that was considered a dishonor. So what they would do is that they would kill their infant girls. And this, coupled with the belief that if you bury the girl alive, and then the gods will send you a boy instead. So the burying of girls took two forms. Either the mother would, literally as she's in labor, she would dig a hole and she would give birth over that hole. And if she gives birth to a girl, the girl is buried right away. Or if she gives birth to a boy, then she embraces the boy. The other form was even more cruel. They would wait until the girl is 6 years old, dress up the girl in the best clothes, dig a hole, and then go tell the girl to go look at this hole, and when she looks at the hole, they push her in, and then they put the dirt over her. And that practice was the belief, the reason you dress up the girl is that you believe that you're giving the girl to the gods, and then the god will replace this with a boy. So this right away notice that the Quran, in the very early revelations, already starts challenging the immoral practices of Mecca. which we know it will become a regular thing in the Quran. But in Surah Al Takwir, we are introduced to something that the recipients of the early Quran noted, took notice of, that here with crimes, with these types of crimes, you are not asking the criminal about what they did, but you're asking the victim. And that was a new concept, that you are actually going to the victims, and it is the victims who are going to prosecute the offenders. And it also became clear in Surah Al Takwir that for this group of people that were following the new prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that they were in opposition to the practice of killing female infants or killing these daughters. But what's interesting is that you find from so many commentators will say that the reason that this worried the Meccans, although the Meccans themselves didn't indulge in that practice, but the tribes outside of Mecca did, is that what it implied was that every case of unjustified killing is unacceptable. Now, why did that trouble the Meccans? Because for them, vengeance killing was a way of life. If someone kills someone from your family, then you kill in response 10 people from their family, and these feuds would go on for years and years. And that was duly noted, and was one of the elements that was starting to get the attentions of the Meccans, that they've got a revolutionary creed on their hand. It is not surprising that, theologian, you find this very common from the very earliest tafsirs, that the basic idea is there is no such thing as a soul that can be extinguished without accountability. And especially that for the Arabs that practice and what, for them, they didn't believe, some of them, especially the tribes that practice what, they didn't believe that girls had a soul. And that was, interestingly, came from Christianity, because the Bible, or early Christians, believed that girls, unlike boys didn't have a soul. And that was incorporated as the hodgepodge of religious beliefs that existed in Arabia. And so it was, today we read it as, okay, so yeah, you shouldn't kill your kids. But it's easy to miss the nuance of the historical moment. How revolutionary that simple statement is. Like when the Quran, very early revelation says, "Fakku raqaba," to free a slave. One of the reports that the Meccans took note of, there was a fellow who converted to Islam and came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, well, I have a problem after Surah Al Takwir, because I've buried 10 girls, and before he became Muslim. And so the Prophet said, in repentance, free 10 slaves. He says, I don't have 10 slaves and I can't afford to buy 10 slaves and free them, the Prophet then says, well, donate 10 cattle in repentance to the poor. But the response of free 10 slaves, again, we talk about retelling the seerah, right? The response of free 10 slaves bothered the Meccans. So now, this new creed has an agenda, and the agenda includes not just empowering the poor and saying that women have souls and that you can't kill people at will, but also that now they're going to be using every excuse to free slaves. Retelling the seerah is a very critical step for those people who talk about decolonialism. We have colonized minds because we understand the seerah from the perspective of colonialism and the epistemology of colonialism. If you want to understand the seerah from a Muslim perspective, free of colonialism and free of apologetics, then it's a completely different matter. Because then these reports take a great deal of significance and understanding how the message was unfolding and what social and cultural impact it was having is very critical. Okay. So 9 delivers that doozy, that thing that got the attention of so many. Right after it, it says, وَإِذَا الصُّحُفُ نُشِرَتْ, when the pages are spread according to the study Quran. What are the suhuf? The suhuf are not necessarily literal pages, but means that when the accounts are put forth. At that point, after all these introductory cataclysmic events, and especially those who suffered injustice are testifying immediately against, including animals, by the way, are testifying against those who offended them. So in other words, they're immediately, those who suffer injustice are given a platform right away. And people start receiving their accounts. وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ قُشِطَتْ, and when the heaven is laid bare. السَّمَاءُ قُشِطَتْ, literally, when قشط الشيء, al-qasht was when you removed the skin of a slaughtered animal. So تقشط الحيوان, so you've slaughtered an animal and then you're removing the skin, right? So وَالسَّمَاءُ قُشِطَتْ, it's a remarkable image because it's as if this biosphere that surrounds the earth will be just rolled up or torn away from the earth. Now, for the modern mind, we understand that this, in fact, there is a very special, ozone that protects the earth, and the idea that is going to be removed makes the earth uninhabitable is worth noting. For, of course, the pre-modern commentators, you read some interesting speculations about what they understood by the skies being torn away, because they didn't this other than Allah saying that if later on that the skies are held by pillars that you don't see. They had no frame of reference to visualize this. But it's rather for this is one of these instances where the modern mind can visualize what the Quran is talking about perhaps better than the pre-modern mind. وَإِذَا الجَّحِيمُ سُعِّرَتْ, and hellfire, it is translated as when hellfire is kindled. I mean, that's good enough. But وَالْجَحِيمُ سُعِّرَتْ, basically when hellfire, or when hell is opened up and brought to life, so it's ready to receive. وَإِذَا الْجَنَّةُ أُزْلِفَتْ, and when heaven is brought near. أزلف الشيء is to bring something close. So both images connote that they are open for business and ready to receive. So when all of this happens, with this introduction, all of this is leading to something, because it says when this happens, when this happens, when this happens. Then what? Each soul, according to the studies, the Quran says, each soul shall know what it has made ready. علمت نفس ما أحضرت. Literally, ما أحضرت, it's like not just being aware of what you've done or your deeds, but that your deeds are brought forth so you can see them. So all of this is leading to this monumental point in which the person confronts the reality of their performance. And their performance is brought forth to them with all its husn and qabh, with all its beauty and ugliness, right before them, so they see it clearly and vividly, without illusions, without excuses. Then immediately, Allah, from that moment of confrontation, the oath starts. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالْخُنَّسِ الْجَوَارِ الْكُنَّسِ وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا عَسْعَسْ وَالصُّبْحِ إِذَا تَنَفَّسْ. Now, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالْخُنَّسِ, let's see how to do. I swear by those receding. What is those receding? What's Al-Khunnas, at the most literal way, and I said the first school of thought that understood it, that it refers to well, what are those things that are receding? And what are those right after it? Al-Jawari al-Kunnas, those that move and set. And they said, well, it's talking about planetary movements. And it's talking about the fact that, from their perspective, the fact that we sometimes can see constellations and we sometimes cannot see constellations. And so many commentators said, well, this refers to constellations and the miracle of the fact that, because of course in pre-modern times, constellations were very important for navigating and for figuring out direction and for travel, and without constellations you were lost. Constellations played a big role in the lives of people. But others said, well, it's not really constellations, because if Allah wanted to swear specifically by constellations, Allah could have said so, but rather by the fact that in the heavens there are shooting planets that shoot what we call shooting stars, and planets that appear and planets that disappear that we know nothing about. But it is a miracle of existence. Now, of course, in the modern world, we know things like dwarfs, and we understand much better how miraculous the life of stars are and what happens in the heavens. And so we are even in a better position to understand al-Khunnas, al-Jawari al-Kunnas than the medievals. But fundamentally, they thought it refers to heavenly bodies, planetary bodies. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا عَسْعَسْ, and as'as is a fascinating word, because as'as could mean to move forward or to go back. You could use it either. And from the word as'as, in medieval Arabic, the police were called asas. Asas, why? Because they spy at night. The police force was seen as the people who spy at night, so they were called asas. So وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا عَسْعَسْ, the fading away of the night, nearly like as if it's shimmering, advancing and retreating as day breaks through. وَالصُّبْحِ إِذَا تَنَفَّسْ, it's a very beautiful imagery of literally as the morning, as if the morning is breathing, erasing the night gently. So Allah is swearing by the miraculous measurements, the miraculous, meticulously worked out balance of planetary movements, of night and day, that that this cannot be by coincidence, that it has a maker. What is Jawab al-Qasam, or what is swearing as to what? Swearing that this is لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ, 19. It's the speech of a noble messenger, as Study Quran translates it, that this is the message, this is the revelation of a noble messenger. In the tradition, there is a debate as to whether when it says لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ, is it referring to the Prophet Muhammad or referring to the angel Gabriel? Is it saying that the that the Rasul Kareem is the angel Gabriel or the Prophet Muhammad. ذي قوة عند ذي العرش مكين, possessed of strength before the possessor of the throne. See, here the Arabic is very poetic, it's very beautiful. The translation is ذي قوة عند ذي العرش مكين. It is already a solid messenger, a truthful messenger, a stable messenger, who has a special position, a secure position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, of course, if it's referring to Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, it's talking about how powerful the angel is. And we know the angel Gabriel is, if it's referring to the Prophet, then it's referring to the soul of the Prophet, the personality of the Prophet, the spirit of the Prophet. In my view, it's referring to the Prophet, although the majority of commentators say it's referring to angel Gabriel. But anyway. مطاع ثم أمين. Yeah, I always look at the translation, see if they could come up with something, but okay. مطاع ثم أمين, obeyed, trustworthy withal. Obeyed and trustworthy. If it's referring to Gabriel, obeyed in the heavens by other angels, no one will defy Gabriel. If it's referring to the Prophet ﷺ, it's referring to the fact that the special status of this Prophet in the heavens. This Prophet might be defied on earth, might be disbelieved on earth, might be fought on earth, but the status of this Prophet in the heavens is a truly special one. And وَلَقَدْ رَآهُ بِالْأُفُقِ الْمُبِينِ, and saw him upon the clear horizon. Here, most commentators say that it's talking about the Prophet ﷺ seeing the angel Gabriel. There are hadiths in this context about the Prophet asking Gabriel to see him in his new form, in true form, and Gabriel telling the Prophet that you won't be able to handle seeing me in my true form, and then Gabriel manifests to the Prophet and the Prophet passes out. Not very reliable hadith, but what is clear is that in some form or another, the vision that the Prophet had of Gabriel is a true one. Some say there is a debate in the tradition whether he saw him in his heart or actually saw him by his eyes. We don't need to get into it, but it's part of the richness of the tradition that you find these debates going on without troubling anyone. وَمَا هُوَ عَلَى الْغَيْبِ بِضَنِينٍ, they translated it as so, and he does not withhold grudgingly the unseen. Very literal. What does that mean? He does not hold grudgingly the unseen. وَمَا هُوَ عَلَى الْغَيْبِ بِضَنِينٍ literally would mean that he does not withhold what is revealed to him. But that's not like the likely meaning of it, of what it says. وَمَا هُوَ عَلَى الْغَيْبِ بِضَنِينٍ, it's an idiomatically, the word ضَنِين can be used to say that he is not privy to the world of the unseen. That he shares with you what is revealed to him, but he, like you, he's a human being. And this is consistent with what the Quran consistently says about the role of the Prophet ﷺ. وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَيْطَانٍ رَجِيمٍ. And this is not a revelation inspired by a demon, as some of the detractors of the Prophet were going around saying, well, you know what, remember, this is the 7th surah, and they were reacting to right after the revelation of Al-Fatiha, especially, and said, well, this must have been inspired by a demon. It must be that this man is possessed by a demon. So the Quran addresses them directly and say, this is not the discourse this is not the way demons talk. فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ. Literally it means, so where are you going? Figuratively it means, so what are you doing? It's like when I tell you, what the heck are you doing by taking the position you're taking? So the Quran is figuratively saying, you people who are, you know that this is not demonic. It reminds me, when I was at the University of Texas, when the stint in my life when I taught undergraduates, I taught a course called Introduction to the Quran. And it was a popular course. I had 60 students. But, you know, of course I had a lot of Muslims take undergraduates take the course, and I also had a lot of Christian zealots take the course. And one of my students, his whole thing, the entire semester, was that Muhammad was possessed by a demon and that the Quran was a satanic revelation. And he attempted to write a paper, I gave it a very bad grade, to prove that perspective. I mean, it's not an academic position, you know, but anyway, it just stayed with me that, you know, it's, yeah. فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ. It's like, figuratively, it's like saying, what's wrong with you? That you are taking such an absurd position. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This is but a message, a remembrance to the world. لِمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ أَن يَسْتَقِيمَ. وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Several things to note here. One, it is a remembrance for those who want it. If the heart is not there, if you don't want the straight path, if you are resistant, this is not for you. This is not going to invoke anything in you. Granted that Allah gives us the willpower to make free choices. So our free choices are contingent on Allah's will. Because if Allah didn't want us to have free choices, we wouldn't have free choices. But Allah wants us to have free choices, and so we do. And that free choice can either lead to the path of istiqamah, the straight path, or it doesn't. Interestingly, notice that this is a very early revelation, and it says dhikrun lil alamin, a message to the worlds, to the humankind. Now, why is this important? Allah, you know, subhanAllah, Allah knows. Centuries later, in our modern age, there are some, I don't know what to describe them as, secular Arabs, like this guy Tarabishi, he's a Syrian scholar, or I don't want to call him a scholar because actually he's not really a scholar. He writes a lot. But he wrote a book saying that it's taken from the Orientalist position that Muhammad really intended his message only to be to Qura, to Arabia. That Muhammad was really just interested in spreading his message to the Meccans and people around Mecca, and it was Muslims after Muhammad who turned Islam into a universal message. And it's remarkable because George Tarabishi, wrote an entire book, and amazingly, you find some Muslims actually admiring this garbage. While the Quran very early on, says it's a message to humankind. So the idea that it was some localized message. Of course, George Tarabishi is taking it from Orientalist scholars who basically wanted to say that Islam is not a world religion, it was just an Arab religion, and it just by accident got out of control and became a world religion. But he's copying that. So, Surah Al Takwir, in the perspective that I've just gone through, is a fairly straightforward surah. First, it warns you about the unfoldings when the hereafter comes. How nature, the nature of nature is going to completely change. Sunlight will change. Water will change. The seas will change. The mountains will change. Even the heavens, the sky that is around us will be rolled up and made to dissipate. And those who have suffered injustice will confront those who committed injustice against them. And people will be confronted with the full truth of their deeds. And that this message is intended to the world, but it is a message that is effective only for those who want the path. And those who don't want it, the message is not going to reach them. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let's start. Okay. So, we went through the first, and I'm going to introduce, inshallah, the second was a quote. I'll read in Arabic and then we'll go from there. This is in Tafsir Ibn Ajiba, who combines traditional with mystical approaches. So, for instance, Ibn Ajiba says, Ibn Ajiba says, اعلم أن النفس والروح والسر أسماء لمسمى واحد وهو اللطيفة اللاهوتية السرية وهو اللطيفة اللاهوتية السارية في الأبدان فما دامت تميل إلى المخالفة والهوى سميت نفسا فإذا تطهرت بالتقوى الكاملة سميت روحا فإذا تزكت وأشرقت عليها أسرار الذات سميت سرا فالإشارة في قوله إذا الشمس كورت إلى تكوير النفس وطيها حين انتقلت إلى مرتبة الروح وإذا النجوم على علم الرسوم انكدرت حين أشرقت عليها شمس العرفان فلم يبقى منها للعارف إلا ما يحتاج إليه من إقامة رسم العبودية يعني يقع الاستغناء عنها فإذا تنزل إليها حققها أكثر من غيره إذا جبال العقل سيرت لأن نوره ضعيف كنوز القمر مع طلوع الشمس وإذا العشار عطلت أي النفوس الحاملة أثقال الأعمال والأحوال والأعباء التدبير والاختيار فيقع الغيب عنها بأثقالها وإذا الوحوش أي الخواطر الرضية حشرت وغرقت في بحر الأحدية، وإذا البحار بحار الأحدية سجرت أي فجرت وانطبقت على الوجود فصارت بحرا واحدا متصلا أوله بآخره وظاهره بباطنه، وإذا النفوس أي الأرواح زوجت بعرائس المعرفة في البقاء بعد الفناء على سرر التقريب والاشتباء. وقال سهل: تآلفت نفس الطبع مع نفس الروح ففرحت في نعيم الجنة كما كانتا متآلفتين في الدنيا على إدامة الذكر. So what Ibn Ajiba is saying represents well the second approach that I mentioned. And they understand most of Surah Al Takwir figuratively, not literally. So when we start with إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, and when the sun is unfolded, first, let me just introduce a basic idea in the system of thought. They talk about النفس الروح والسر. النفس is the soul unpurified and in a state of blindness. When you are struggling with all your desires, passions, your base self, that's the nafs. As you purify it so that it's closer to its divine nature, it becomes the ruh. And the sir is what they refer to as when that soul achieves union with the divine, then it becomes beyond the ruh, beyond the soul. So when they read وَإِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, they understand that to be figurative reference. All of Surah Al Takwir is not really about the hereafter, but it is about the process of the growth of the soul. So وَإِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ refers to when one is set on the process of folding up the nafs, of confronting that weak soul, that pedantic soul, that mundane soul, and is determined to fold it up so as to set the ruh, the divine soul, free. وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْقَدَرَتْ, the nujum here are the things that we attach our false sense of being to, our false sense of worth to. When the sun, when the light of the divine shines, these false systems of belief, like for instance believing in constellations as determining your luck or your future, or whatever you think in fact defines you in mundane life, whether it's your degrees, your job, your family relations, your whatever, they are as artificial as these stars that would vanish in an instant. if the light of the divine shines through. وَالْجِبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ, it doesn't refer to actual mountains, but when you are able to confront the mountains, means the heavy weight of your guilt and your insecurity and all the egoism that goes, they picture this as a mountain. All the egoism that goes in covering over the sense of insecurity and your sense of guilt. We cover our sense of guilt by stubbornness and nastiness. When we're guilty, we actually, instead of saying we're really messed up, we actually become defiant and more obstinate. So وَإِذَا الْجِبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ, that these are the mountains that Allah is referring to, the mountains of defiance, arising from insecurity and the egoism. وَإِذَا الْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ, when your basic animalistic instincts are brought under control. Now, just to demonstrate the point, why do they read things this way? Well, for one, they say, yes, it could have the literal meaning. But if you look at the entire surah, as I'll show you in a second, you see that Allah chose expressions that could have a different level of meaning. So for instance, Ishar Uttilat, a word that could mean clouds, it could mean land, it could mean valuable camels, but it could also mean your inner self that is laden with confusion that you confront. And so when they find words that could have multiple meanings like that in a book that is, when it wants, it is extremely precise, that is often the gateway to these interpretations. وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ, when you confront the beast within, all of us have animalistic sides. The sides that draw us towards sexual enjoyment, selfishly, or consumption, or going to the bathroom, or all these base animalistic sides that if you are in the process of transformation, you confront and you bring under control. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ, they understand that maw'uda, before that, I jumped. وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ, the seas that are either set afire or the seas that are made to flow, they understand that as al-bihar sujirat means the seas of supernal divine knowledge. As you throw yourself into the sea of divine irfani knowledge, you tell Allah, Allah, I'm tired of my ego. I'm tired of the intellect. I'm tired of what they've led me to and what they've done with me. I want knowledge from you and you directly. And the seas of that knowledge starts opening. And that's the بحار سجرت. وإذا النفوس زوجت, and you are coupled with the truth of the self. You confront the self, and in Surah Al Takwir, Sufis have some beautiful writings, testimonials about tazwij al-nafs. When you see yourself, we see ourselves physically in a mirror. The path that they talk about, that Surah Al Takwir describes, is seeing the truth of the self in a mirror. So it's as if you are seeing an actual reflection of who you really are in a mirror, for better or for worse. And if it's for worse, you're going to change it, obviously, and that's a transformation. Okay. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. And here they don't understand that as referring just to the girl that was buried alive, but they say al-maw'uda su'ilat. The maw'uda is your true supernal self, the divine self that you are born with, that you suppress through the acts of egoism. And when you confront that self, and it speaks back to you and says, why have you murdered me? Why have you buried me? Why have you put a pile of garbage, heaped a pile of garbage over me? At that point, وَإِذَا الصُّحُفُ نُشِرَتْ. At that point, you start seeing your deeds embodied in this journey of transformation. وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ قُشِطَتْ. Yeah. وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ قُشِطَتْ. This is 11. And when the heaven is laid bare is the way it's translated. وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ قُشِطَتْ. The sama here, سماء الحس تقشطت عن أسرار المعاني. That the sky that the ayah is mentions here is the world of sensory world in which you live in. And as that sensory world comes under control, so that you are not relying on the eyes, the nose, the ears, these senses, for the way you deal with reality, as you roll them in, you rein them in, you control them. What was often known as the third eye comes to life. In other words, the extrasensory perceptions within you come to life. At that point, وَإِذَا الجَّحِيمُ سُعِرَتْ وَإِذَا الْجَنَّةُ أُزْلِفَتْ. So the Jahim that is su'irat here, and the Jannah that uzlifat, the hellfire that is that you confront, and the paradise is you confront, is the true sense of husn and qubh within you. So that you are in total honest confrontation with both the hellfire that you created for yourself and the heaven that you've created for yourself. So, for example, how does he put it? نار القطيعة سعرت لأهل الفراق والجنة جنة المعارف. That At that process of transformation, your hell is here and now, but it is the hell of the truth of your actions. And the heaven is here and now, and it is the heaven of the truth of your actions. علمت نفس ما أحضرت. That's the point of true transparency and true perception. It is only then that you have true perception as to who you are, where you are, what you're doing with your life, and where you're going. فلا أقسم بالخنس الجوار الكنس. Now, interestingly, in the Sufi orientation, or what I'm calling Sufi, but it's not just Sufi, but in that second school, much of the approach to Surah Al Takwir was because of the oath that Allah chooses. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالْخُنَّسِ الْجَوَارِ الْكُنَّسِ. Because Allah chooses an oath that is intentionally vague. Allah is swearing by those that hide and those that move, not explicitly by planets. And for that orientation, they said, well, if you look at this oath, why is Allah choosing this oath? Why not elsewhere in the Quran, Allah swears by planets very explicitly, by stars very explicitly. But here, Allah swears by things that hide and things that, if you will, move. Al-Jawari al-Kunnas. So, and what are these? Now, here, I want to just do another quote, and then I'll say. This is from Ibn Ajiba again. فلا أقسم بالخنس الحواس الخمس وهي السمع والبصر والشم والذوق والوجدان الباطني فإنها تخنس أي تتأخر عن سطوع حلاوة الشهود، وهي الجوار الكنس لأنها تجري في تحصيل هواها عند الغفلة أو الفترة، تستتر عند الذكر أو اليقظة. والليل إذا عسعس أي ليل القطيعة إذا أظلم على عبد برؤية وجوده ووقوفه مع عوائده. والصبح أي صبح الاستشراف على نهار المعرفة إذا تنفس ثم تطلع شمس شيئا فشيئا. إنه أي الوحي الإلهامي لقول رسول كريم وأراد ووارد رباني ذي قوة لأنه يأتي مع حضرة قهار قوي متين فلا يصادم شيئا مع مساوئ إلا دمه. So what he's saying is فلا أقسم بالخنس. الخنس could also have a different meaning, and these are the senses when they are used in the most base way. So, for instance, we say al-waswas al-khannas, we refer to shaitan as waswas khannas. Someone who khannas, low and disgusting, lowly, degrading, khannas, not a good thing. If someone is in prostitution, we could say that they are in khinasa, the job. So when Allah says فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالْخُنَّسِ, when you use these senses without restraint, you are debasing yourself. Al-Jawari al-Kunnas, literally when they are in motion, pursuing the needs of the ego, which fits perfectly. al-jawari al-kunnas, when they are in motion pursuing the needs of the ego. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا عَسْعَسْ, the darkness that besets upon a human being when that is their nature, the darkness of ignorance and anxiety. وَالصُّبْحِ إِذَا تَنَفَّسْ, and the light of the divine as it breezes. Now look how gentle the expression is. That if you are trying to roll and control your senses and to open yourself to the light of the divine, it is as if the light breathes through. It doesn't come in one full swoop. It doesn't remove the darkness, but it penetrates like rays. After that introduction that describes to you the process of transformation that a human being is capable of and should take, it comes and tells you this is truly the path. If this is what you want, this is the path. The only way you can attain it is through this. And then, speaking, after having revealed this what they call the deep secret, this deep secret, it tells you that this prophet is not insane. This prophet is not demonically possessed. This prophet is on a sure path, the path of truth. And فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ is now not a question of what's wrong with you, but a question as to what path are you going to take? Where are you going to go? What is your choice? Do you want to take that path of enlightenment? Or do you want to stay with the delusions and the falsity that you're in? This is the remembrance for those who want it. But know that whatever path, the path that you choose to take, in either case, is never beyond the control of the divine and the will of the divine. I want to share with you another beautiful quote, and I'll comment on it. This time from Ismail Haqqi, also within the second school that I talked about. Okay, so he says, الإقسام بها أن القرآن نور من الله فلا يرد إلا على قلب النوراني الذي هو بمنزلة القدر وعلى الروح الذي هو بمنزلة القمر وعلى الروح الذي هو بمنزلة الشمس وعلى القوى الروحانية التي هي بمنزلة سائر السيارات المضيئة. وهذه الأنوار لا تظهر في الوجود الإنساني إلا بزوال آثار الطبيعة والنفس وظهور آثار القلب والروح. فإذا أشرقت أنوار الروح وقواه في ليل الوجود أضاء جميع ما في الوجود وزال الظلام. لقول رسول كريم أي هو جبريل عليه السلام قال من جهة الله قال السهيلي ولا يجوز أنه أراد به أنه قال so on and so forth. So what he's saying is that Surah Al Takwir, the Ruh, are like luminous, like a luminous substance, the truth of which cannot be experienced. The truth of which cannot be experienced. unless the contaminants upon the soul are removed. And the contaminants, if removed, then it is literally as if peeling off the darkness and opening the gateway to the light, to the morning. And the more the soul is dependent on the mechanisms of the ego, the covetous senses, the more the soul is entrapped and unable to be the dominant force in the life of a human being. So Surah Al Takwir has an existence that I am sure vast majority of Muslims were never exposed to and would never be exposed to. In an entire tradition in Islam that saw Surah Al Takwir not as describing necessarily the final day and the terrifying happenings of the final day, but the actual birth, actual transformation of the soul from a state of ignorance to a state of enlightenment. And even in the opinion of like someone like Ibn Arabi says, Surah Al Takwir for the wayfarer, for someone who wants to that path, is an essential instrument that you read the surah over and over and over and over again until what Ibn Arabi says are the true meanings of the surah reveal themselves to you and comfort you in the path and take your hand and deliver you in the path. And that is why if any of you have had experience with nearly all tariqas that I know of, I mean legitimate tariqas, they'll tell you it's not unusual at all that if you go to a sheikh and the sheikh will say part of your word is to read Surah Al Takwir 30 times. That's the reason. I mean, a lot of times they don't tell you the reason till much later, but that's the reason. They'll tell you, part of your word is to read it 30 times a day or whatever. So these are the two. Now we come to the third. And Allahu Alam, of course, Allah knows best. My journey with Surah Al Takwir is that it describes at the beginning something frightening. And clearly it describes a process, a dynamic. Before it gets to the part where Allah is swearing, and we know that the rule is when Allah swears by something, it is something that deserves intense reflection. And before Allah presents the oath, and then Allah tells us the solution, and that is the message itself. My journey with Surah Al Takwir convinced me of the following, and Allah knows best. إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ. When the sun is rolled up. وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ, and the stars are unfolded and darkened. وَإِذَا الجِّبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ, and the mountains are moved. What is this describing? At the very least, it's describing a deep state of anxiety and fear. And in my prayers and my journey and my reflection of Surah Al Takwir, it describes a human being when they are in a state of absolute crisis. That human being suddenly, for whatever reason, the sun, what they know, what they think they know, the things that they live thinking that they know, the things that they relied on in life, the sources of their joy and happiness have been rolled up. Shams Kuwirat is the sun of your happiness. What used to give you meaning, suddenly in a state of crisis you find that it's being taken away. وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ, the things that you thought gave you meaning, the nujum. What are the nujum? The stars that give you guidance. In Qadarat, because in your state of crisis they've been darkened and you no longer can see stars in your life. The things that you relied on for direction are dissipating or have dissipated and become covered over. وَإِذَا الجِّبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ, and the mountains, the anchors of meaning, the thing that used to anchor you in meaning, have suddenly been shaken. You are no longer sure of the things you were sure of. وَإِذَا الْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ, Ishar here, an old source of good suddenly is no longer yielding good for you. The things that used to bring you joy and happiness and value no longer do so. That's Ishar Uttilat. وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ, and the beasts have been gathered. What beasts? Think about it. Pray on it. The beasts of your fears and your anxieties, everything that terrify you, have gathered upon you. وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ, the sea is often in the Quran a symbol of wisdom and knowledge. But here, the bihar, sujjirat, which I told you could mean they dried up or could mean they've exploded. All of you, all of us have been in a situation where we felt that the seeds of knowledge and wisdom have suddenly dried up on us or suddenly exploded to become confused. We no longer know the meaning of things. It's there, but they don't make sense to us anymore. وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, at that point, You are coupled. But the question is, coupled with what? Often we are coupled with the worst of what we are. The version of us that we hate. The version that we can't stand. Quite often it is a weak version. It is an insecure version. It is an unstable version. It is a devastated version. It is a broken version. At that point, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. Who is the ma'uda here? In my prayers, I realize that the ma'uda is me. It is you. When you are in that state, you have buried yourself and killed yourself because of your depression and your anxiety and your fear. And Allah is asking you, why have you done that? Why have you killed yourself? Why have you buried yourself? وَإِذَا الصُّحُفُ نُشِرَتْ. As you try to struggle to come out of the process of burying yourself, out of your sadness, out of your depression, out of your anxiety, you are confronted by the suhuf. The suhuf, the memories of your deeds, what you've done and didn't do. And you are thinking to yourself, if I only would have done this, if I only would have done this, if I only would have said this, if I only would have said that. That's the suhuf nushirat. وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ قُشِطَتْ. But as you do that, everything that used to give you security, that's the sky. قُشِطَتْ means it's been ripped away. Like you rip the hide off an animal. You feel so insecure and so scared. The heaven that used to give you protection has been ripped away, taken away. At that point, you have a real choice. You either dwell further into your jahim, into the hellfire, or you make the decision to avoid hellfire and force yourself to a Jannah uzlifat. A Jannah uzlifat here is Allah's mercy that brings the means of relief close to you. It's whether you want to see it or not. Jannah uzlifat is Allah brings that relief, Allah's extended hand close to you, whether you want to take that hand or not. علمت نفس ما أحضرت. Here, in my view, you are alone with your choice. You either take Allah's hand and go the path of Jannah, or you reject Allah's hand and sink further in your hellfire, in your jahim. فلا أقسم بالخنس الجوار الكنس والليل إذا عسعس والصبح إذا تنفس. Like the Sufis, I agree that the qasam here, the oath, is by that hides and that moves, and the night of ignorance and the light of illumination. But the difference is this. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالْخُنَّسِ are the things that you hide deep within, you refuse to confront, that are the cause of your misery. The secrets that you keep against yourself that are the cause of your misery. Al-Jawari al-Kunnas, the things that move within, that challenge your secrets and challenge your deceptions and challenge the way you defraud yourself. And the night, the asas, Allah chooses asas, which, as I said, means to either move forward or move backwards. Why? Because that night, that darkness, could either completely engulf you or retreat, depending on what your choice is. وَالصُّبْحِ إِذَا تَنَفَّسْ, and that shy and hesitant morning that you can invite in if you wish. You want the way out? The only way out is to remember that this is a message of the Rasul, the Kareem, the most honorable and honored prophet, that has brought you the message. In other words, your way out is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran. You can choose to go to the Quran and say to the Quran, help me out of my misery. I'm lost. Or you can be lost further. It's entirely up to you. And the oath continues, or the assurance continues, that this is the prophet, not insane, not a sorcerer, not possessed. And the ذكر للعالمين لمن شاء منكم أن يستقيم وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله رب العالمين. The affirmation at the end that this is a remembrance of what is within you already embedded, but the choice is yours. Now, linguistically, when I didn't arrive at this meaning of Surah Al Takwir through just rational analysis or linguistic analysis. I arrived at this understanding of Surah Al Takwir because of the spirit of the surah itself. I agree with the Sufis that it is telling us something about an intense case of anxiety. But I think it is talking about a situation in which, like the early Muslims, they were confronting and were about to confront an increased amount of tribulations, this remarkable tests. And in that moment, they are confronting deep anxieties about the self. Am I really going to forego the family that I know? My mother will not allow me to be a Muslim. My father will not allow me to be a Muslim. They will boycott me. They will hate me. At that moment, your sun, your stars, your mountain, your Your everything is being discombobulated, is being torn asunder. You are in increased state of depression. Remember that the Prophet ﷺ was engaged to a woman, and when he became a prophet, her father broke off the engagement. So many of those who converted to Islam, they found forcibly they were separated from their wives, they were separated from their parents, they were separated from their children. When you look at the seerah, the thing that strikes you is that they were truly being confronted with one heart-wrenching situation after another. And Surah Al Takwir is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, I know what it means to be going through that level of depression. But there is only one sure path out. And that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the way I understand Surah Al Takwir. And Allah knows best. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.